Welcome to our channel, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, as always, for your continued support. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya, our country, is part of the larger global world, and our relationship with different countries affect us either indirectly or directly. And from time to time, you'll realize that Kenya and many other countries will review how we relate to each other from the socio-economic and the political relationship. You'll realize that, for example, Kenya has got a very fine statistics on how we relate to maybe the East African countries, the large African countries in terms of trade. They understand that, for example, our coffee or pyrethrum or tea gets a larger market, for example, maybe in China or in US. And how do other countries relate to us on the same line? And you realize that from time to time we review, other countries also review their relationship with us. Now, there is a report that has been released by the US Congress, highlighting the relationship between US and Kenya, and it has really tackled many areas: economy, human rights, politics, name them. And I want us to look at this report. But before we look at it, ladies and gentlemen, I was trying to search why the US Congress should give a report highlighting the Kenya-US relationship. And I want to give you what I found very fast before we look at the report itself, because it has got several touchy issues that I believe William Ruto must be worried about. Now, it says that the US Congress likely provides reports on US-Kenya relations to inform policy decisions, track the progress of existing initiatives, and potentially address specific concerns or issues. And it goes further to say these reports can cover a range of topics, including security cooperations, economic partnerships, trade, and human rights, just to give but a few of them. Then it says, because I just want to support that, even in more detail, is that Congress will give a report for policy formulation and oversight, tracking progress and accountability, addressing specific issues, informal diplomacy, informing the public, and legislative action. Basically, over a period of time, US will sit down and review in terms of policy. How do we relate with them in terms of trade, in terms of human rights? What about politics? For example, Kenya is a very major partner of US when it comes to terrorism counterattack. So they have to review over the years how we have fared with them. Now, having looked at that, ladies and gentlemen, the report that the Congress gave is entitled Kenya, Current Issues and US Relations. I want you to highlight current issues and US relations. In other words, they're looking at the current issues that affect how we relate with them. I want us to look at this report, but before this, allow me to request you to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell if you love our show. By clicking the notification bell, YouTube will notify you whenever we release a video like this. Please like and share our videos. This helps the channel grow. It promotes our videos. Ladies and gentlemen, it starts like this. Long-standing US ties with Kenya have deepened over the past decades, despite some tensions. That is how it starts, because it's like a long letter or a review. In the first paragraphs, the Congress starts by saying that we've enjoyed a deeper relationship, the two countries. And they give an example that in May 2024, Joe Biden invited Ruto for an official state visit when Kenya and US was celebrating the 60th anniversary of their long-standing relationship. And the Congress goes ahead to say that this was Ruto was the first African president from 2008. Then in the same paragraph they say that Kenya was made a non-NATO ally. Then it goes to say that Kenya has been a very strong partner and ally to the US in terms of counterterrorism. Then they also highlight the fact that Kenya has benefited from US in terms of foreign aids. I think recently Donald Trump stopped some aids, but Kenya has been benefiting. And they say that we've also benefited from trade tariffs, especially in the AGOA, the African Growth Opportunity Act, that sometimes gives subsidies on how we trade with the US. So in the first paragraph, they simply try to highlight how Kenya has benefited from US aids and all that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it goes on to talk about how we've become stronger partners. But there is a paragraph that I want us to look at because it is what is going to inform the basis of this analysis. It says that President Ruto, meanwhile, has faced turbulence at home. Remember, they've been talking about how we relate the foreign policies. Now they're saying President Ruto, meanwhile, has faced turbulence at home. Kenya is often characterized as a comparatively stable and democratic anchor state in a troubled region. But a few protest movements led by young Kenyans shook the country in 2024, sparking a political crisis that Ruto, elected in 2022, has struggled to overcome. Facing a heavy debt burden and the threat of default, Ruto tried to raise taxes, which fueled public anger amidst widespread frustration with the rising cost of living. Tens of thousands went to the streets in June 2024 to protest proposed tax hikes. And when legislators passed the tax bill over public opposition, some demonstrators stormed the parliament. Dozens were killed in the police response to the protests, and over 1,000 people were arrested. The protest highlighted frustration with economic hardships, public sector corruption, and a perceived lack of governmental accountability. The protest highlighted frustration with economic hardships, public sector corruption, and a perceived lack of government accountability. The display of public discontent was an unprecedented challenge for the government. Ruto reversed the tax bill and reshuffled his cabinet, and he brought several opposition politicians into his government. Human rights groups have since raised growing concern with a spate of abductions and killings of Kenyan government critics, and with a series of forcible extraditions of foreign dissidents from Kenya. Ruto continues to face calls for his ouster and allegations, including from former allies, of corruption as his government tries to navigate public opposition to new taxes, manage Kenya's debt, and position Ruto for re-election in 2027. Ladies and gentlemen, I read that part. It's a very long report. In fact, if you go ahead, it talks about how William Ruto impeached his deputy and how his former deputy is now gathering opposition leaders to ensure that William Ruto is a one-term president. Why did I pick on that? And that is exactly what I want us to look at, ladies and gentlemen, because when William Ruto got to power, William Ruto is a man who decided to become the American puppet, or rather listening too much to the international community. You remember how he decided to play into the trap of Joe Biden when he took our policemen to Haiti. That is also highlighted there, how the relationship of Kenya and and US have got some ties even to fight terrorism, to ensure that we bridge peace within and without our presence within East Africa and above. And William Ruto is a man who wanted to showcase how he's loved by Kenyans, how he was elected overwhelmingly across the tribes. Remember, even when he started, he was like, he was telling Africa, he was the new kid on the block. Some people almost mistook him as the new Pan-Africanist because he was saying we cannot depend on dollar. You know this story around William Samoei Ruto. But if you read that report, it will tell you that William Ruto can no longer hide. William Ruto is like a child who wants to go to a groundnut plantation and hide there when the whole of his body is exposed. So I want us to make certain conclusions out of that report, because it is a report that highlights the relationship between US and Kenya. And we started by looking at why these reports are very important, because they help in tracking the progress of existing, initiatives. They inform policy decisions, and they can be used to address specific concerns. For example, if US wants to address a concern about human rights violation, then they will look at that report. Now, just recently, the United Nations Human Rights Council reviewed the Kenyan human rights record. That happened on May 1st this year. They sat down as a council and they were reviewing how the government has been proclaiming human rights respect or violation at the same time. And they were using the report that has been provided by the government of Kenya and many other independent institutions like the Law Society of Kenya, Kenya National Human Rights Commission, other human rights bodies. So they reviewed the human rights record in the country. Then recently, BBC explained just how the police, together with the military, ganged up to kill Gen Zs who got into parliament. So, having given you this, highlight, I want us to make certain conclusions. Number one, Gen Z's protest left a huge impact in Ruto's political career. You can imagine that this is discussed at the Congress. And the Congress highlights that when William Ruto came to power, he wanted to bridge the debt gap. So he abandoned all the subsidies and raised taxes. Of course, if you read further, it says those were the dictates of the Bretton Woods institutions. The World Bank and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, had directed William Ruto that subsidies would not be sustainable. So he abandoned them, increased taxes. And then during the Finance Bill 2024, against public protest, legislators passed that bill. And that brought about the protest in the country. And Gen Zs went to the street, they were abducted, they were killed. William Ruto was forced to dissolve his cabinet and all that. So this tells you that Gen Z's protest was not small. The impact was felt worldwide, and it is now on record. It is recorded at the Congress in USA. And this is a rallying call to Gen Zs. Even though they were killed and they had to curtail their main goal, because they had started the Ruto must go calls. Raila Amolo Odinga helped William Ruto, saying that we could not afford to go the Somali way. But this tells Gen Zs that they shook this nation. They shook William Ruto's administration. William Ruto was almost going home. They must continue with this push. And in 2027, Gen Zs, as it is recorded, they are the major threat to Ruto's re-election. They must understand that what they did shook the nation, and both the local and international media were looking at what was happening, and in one conclusion, all of them in one accord are saying that Ruto was shaken and the major threat to his re-election are Gen Zs. And I've told you this is coming at a time when BBC confirmed the same. Recently, when the president of Finland jetted into the country, Ruto was confronted with this question again. What is the government of Kenya doing to ensure that a repeat of the same does not happen? Ruto lied that all the people who were abducted have reunited with their families, and it sparked a lot of protest. People are saying no. People are now coming up and saying we have people who went and they've never been seen. So Gen Z must understand that they have a date with William Ruto come 2027. As I always say, they must sensitize, register as voters, shun corruption, shun, taking bribes, stop being divided along tribal lines. And 2027, they shook the foundation of the Kenya Kwanza regime. They must go in full swing and eradicate this regime and employ another person who will listen to them. Number two, this report tells Ruto that he's an exposed man. He's been telling people how he used to say that some people were being abducted during Uhuru regime, and they were with the Uhuru anyway, and they were being killed and thrown into Rivayala, and he had promised that this would not happen. Now the report indicates just how the police responded with full brutal force, how people were kidnapped, how they were killed, and it tells you just how this has exposed William Ruto as the champion of human rights violation, considering that there is the freedom of picketing and demonstrations. In their own words, Ruto's allies, people like Kimani Ichung'wah, the majority leader, said that Gen Zs were very harmless. They only protested using iPhones, according to Kimani Ichung'wah. iPhones, they were taking selfies and maybe a bottle of water. It means that Gen Zs were non-violent. But William Ruto met them with full force. And this has really exposed him at the international front as a person who does not respect human rights. Remember, I was also telling you about the recent review on 1st May when the United Nations Human Rights Council sat down to review Kenya's human rights record. They go together. Another thing, it has really exposed William Ruto as a dictator and a man who does not respect our constitution. Remember, the report also says that we extradited some people who do not read from the same script. People could be called opposition leaders in their countries. Remember how Kizza Besigye was abducted in our own soil and he was taken, to Uganda court-martial. It was a very touching story. And I think at sometimes he went on hunger strike. He was emaciated. He was very tired. And he was picked by force in Kenyan soil. So apart from William Ruto thriving in abduction, human rights violation, he also goes ahead and violates international human rights policies, because as part of the United Nations, we are supposed to protect people who are either asylum, so people who are running away from being victims of persecution from their countries. That has been captured and highlighted. The US Congress is saying that Ruto continues to stare at the Ruto must go calls. People are calling for his ouster. You remember everywhere people go, even in the US, they say Ruto must go and they understand. So all this has been captured. What does this tell you? In the event that Ruto is defeated in 2027, it won't be a big issue because the Congress has highlighted that Ruto looks like he's unwanted because of corruption that has been highlighted there, taxes that he continues to levy on people, difficult economic maneuvers, and that has been highlighted there. So ladies and gentlemen, this has been captured carefully in this report that was given out by the Congress. The Congress also understands that William Ruto is grappling with allegations of corruption. That is why whenever people say Ruto must go, you hear them say Mwizi. Ruto must go, Mwizi. And so even if William Ruto will be voted against, they will say, according to their report, they understand what Kenyans are talking about. They say William Ruto is corrupt. If you read the report from the Auditor General, and the control of budget, it just highlights just how corrupt this government is. So, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why I wanted us to discuss this is because it has exposed William Ruto. Let no one deceive you that William Ruto can hide anywhere. The report exposes and everything is in black and white. Gen Z's movement is something that is now felt all over the world. In fact, Gen Zs must understand that whatever they did had a very huge impact. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as they formulate their policies and follow on certain initiatives, Kenya has been exposed, and William Ruto is being read all over the world. His conduct, his character, how his human rights record, how he deals with people. Do you think William Ruto has a reason to worry? If you ask me, there's a big reason to worry because Joe Biden is not there, Meg Whitman is not there, and so he can no longer go on as if it is business as usual. In fact, one of the things that were also highlighted is his trip to China and how he's now trying to make a U-turn because Joe Biden is not there now. He's trying to extend some olive branch to the eastern superpowers, and this does not stand well with the US. We want to see how things are going to transpire, but I think William Ruto is sitting at a very precarious moment because 2027 is not very far.